70,000 acres, 0% contained. That number, 0, is the one I want you to sit with for a moment before we get into anything else. Right now, as you're watching this, the Cottonwood Fire in Beaver County, Utah has consumed 70,991 acres. Firefighters have not put a single containment line around a single inch of it. Not one. The fire started June 22nd. In 5 days, it grew from a spark near a campground off State Route 153 to the most destructive wildfire in the recorded history of the state of Utah. It destroyed the Eagle Point Ski Lodge. It drove families from Merchant Valley, Hilo Estates, and Arrowhead summer homes in the middle of the night. And as of this morning, 1/3 of every active fire suppression crew in the entire United States is deployed to the Great Basin region trying to hold it. Not in the West as a whole, not distributed across multiple regions. 1 out of every 3 firefighters in this country is already committed, and the worst heat of the year has not even started yet. That last part is what I really need you to understand, because today, June 27th, is the calm before what is coming. What is coming is not a routine summer heat wave. What is coming is 2 separate high-pressure systems locking hands over the central United States. Together they will build something the NOAA Climate Prediction Center is describing as the most widespread heat event of the entire summer so far. That distinction matters. We have been through hot days this season. We have had isolated triple-digit afternoons in Texas and a rough stretch in the desert southwest. This one is different. This one is targeting the people who have not felt it yet. The Midwest, the South, the Great Lakes, cities from Minneapolis to Nashville to Atlanta to Chicago. And it is arriving in the days immediately before the 4th of July, when millions of Americans are planning outdoor events, parades, concerts, and fireworks shows. I have been watching the GFS and Euro ensemble runs for several days now, and I want to walk you through what is about to happen, not just this weekend, but day by day, all the way to the holiday. And then I want to tell you what this heat dome means in the context of a much larger pattern that is developing in the Pacific, because the two are connected in a way that should concern all of us for the rest of the summer. My name is Arthur, and this is Sky Space Lab. What we do here is take the actual data, the models, the ensemble suites, the official government discussions, and translate them into something you can use. If you have not subscribed yet, please do that right now. Hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let us get into this forecast. Let me be direct about something before I show you the data. The videos covering this event are going to multiply rapidly over the next 48 to 72 hours. You're going to see headlines everywhere. Some of them will be accurate, some will be alarmist, some will be deliberately calm in a way that undersells what is happening. What I am going to do in this video is different. I am going to show you the actual model runs. I am going to show you what the ensemble mean says versus what the deterministic models show. I am going to tell you where the uncertainty is, and I am going to tell you which specific cities in which specific states face the highest risk, and why. Because that is the only version of this forecast that is actually useful to you. The subtitle of this event, the thing that is not in most coverage right now, is that this is not just a heat wave. It is a convergence, a wildfire crisis in the west, a heat dome building in the south, an El Nino signal strengthening in the Pacific. These 3 things are arriving at the same moment, and the 4th of July is in the middle of all of it. That is what today's video is about. Let me start where the crisis is already happening, in the West. The National Weather Service has issued what they call a particularly dangerous situation fire weather flag across a wide swath of the interior from Nevada through Utah and into Texas. That language is not routine. They use it sparingly. They use it when the combination of heat, humidity, and wind crosses a threshold where they believe safe and timely evacuation may not be possible if a new fire approaches a populated area. It is among the strongest statements a Weather Service office can make, and it is active right now across one of the most fire-stressed regions in the country. The numbers behind that warning are stark. Relative humidity values across the Great Basin are running in the single digits in many locations. Wind gusts up to 50 miles per hour have been documented in the elevated terrain. In that combination, critically low humidity and high winds, a new ignition can reach 1,000 acres in under 2 hours. The Cottonwood Fire is the headline, but it is not alone. The Iron Fire in Juab and Tuil counties has burned 40,445 acres. It is 26% contained and still threatens over 1,500 structures. The town of Eureka, Utah, is under a Level 3 GO evacuation order right now. The Hastings fire in Toole County near Interstate 80 has burned 26,400 acres and sits at 75% contained, and smoke from all three fires is not staying local, it is drifting east across the Rockies. Salt Lake City has been under air quality alerts. Moab is impacted. The plume is forecast to push further east into portions of the Central Plains this weekend, which means hazy skies and elevated particulate levels may reach cities in Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas, even with no fire activity nearby. Now, here is the question I think matters most this morning. Why is this happening in late June, before the traditional peak of fire season? The winter is the answer. The 2025 through 2026 winter was the warmest on record for Utah. Snowpack finished the season at one of the lowest levels ever documented for the state. That snowpack is not just water storage. It is also the mechanism that keeps soils moist and vegetation green through the spring transition. Without it, the fuels, the grasses, the sagebrush, the juniper stands, dried out weeks ahead of schedule. By the time June arrived, firefighters across the Great Basin were already working in conditions that historically would not be seen until late July. Fire season arrived early because the season that prepares the landscape for fire arrived warm and dry, and now a heat dome is coming to make it worse. What is happening in the atmosphere right now is this. Two separate upper-level high-pressure systems are positioned over the country. The first is already anchored over the Gulf Coast. The second is positioned further west. Over the next several days, these two systems are going to merge. As they combine, they will build a single, massive, consolidated ridge of high pressure that will expand north and east from Texas and ultimately cover most of the central and eastern United States. A heat dome forms when that kind of persistent upper-level ridge traps hot air at the surface, compresses and warms it as it sinks from above, and suppresses clouds and rainfall that would otherwise provide relief. You get more sunshine, you get higher temperatures, you get no rain. And critically, you get very warm overnight lows, because the same lid that traps heat in the day also prevents the surface from cooling at night. That overnight piece is the one forecasters are watching most carefully. NOAA forecasters wrote specifically in their official discussion that overnight lows will be quite warm during this event, with some record high minimum temperatures possible, and that there will be little to no relief from the heat during the nighttime hours. When overnight lows stay above 75 or 80 degrees, which is what is being projected for portions of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi and Tennessee next week, the human body cannot complete its natural overnight recovery from heat stress. The cardiovascular system needs the cooler hours to reset. When those hours are taken away, the danger compounds day after day. That mechanism is precisely what turned the 1995 Chicago heatwave into one of the deadliest natural disasters in American history. It was not the peak daytime temperature, it was the nights. Overnight lows staying in the upper 70s and low 80s, no reset. By the third consecutive night, the accumulated stress becomes life-threatening. We're not comparing this event to 1995 Chicago, but the physical mechanism I just described is the same one that will be active across large portions of this country next week. Let me walk you through the timeline now. Right now, today, June 27th, the first dome is already producing dangerous heat along the Gulf Coast. The National Weather Service in Houston is advertising heat index values of 97 to 109 degrees Fahrenheit today. Morning low temperatures in the Houston area are projected at 74 to 84 degrees overnight. I want you to sit with the upper end of that range, 84 degrees as the overnight low, in a city where millions of people live and work outdoors, where construction crews start before sunrise, where the unhoused population has no air conditioning. Consider what that means physically. The human body can tolerate daytime temperatures well above 100 degrees if the night provides relief. Your core temperature drops, your cardiovascular system resets, you can face the next day. But when you remove that overnight window, when the air stays in the low 80s all night, you go into the following afternoon already carrying accumulated heat load from the previous day. Each day compounds the previous one. By day 3 of elevated overnight lows, what would be a manageable hot afternoon in isolation becomes a medical emergency threshold for the elderly, for infants, for anyone with heart disease, kidney disease, or respiratory illness. The National Weather Service does not issue heat warnings casually. When you see an excessive heat warning posted across multiple states simultaneously next week, and you will, understand that it means the forecasters have calculated that the combination of temperatures and overnight lows puts the general population at risk of heat illness, not just the vulnerable population. The threshold for excessive heat warnings is based on public health models, not just temperature records. Corpus Christi, Texas is already under a heat advisory today. Galveston is in the same zone. Baton Rouge, Louisiana will likely join that advisory picture by Sunday. The Gulf Coast corridor from South Texas through southern Louisiana is the leading edge of what is building behind it. These areas have the highest heat index values because they combine the highest air temperatures with the highest atmospheric moisture. Dew points across the Gulf Coast today are running in the low to mid-70s. A dew point of 73 degrees combined with an air temperature of 98 degrees produces a heat index of 110 to 112 degrees Fahrenheit. At that level, the National Weather Service classifies the heat index as dangerous, meaning heat cramps and heat exhaustion are likely, and heat stroke is possible with prolonged exposure. The Gulf Coast is already there, and the rest of the country catches up over the next week. Where are you watching from right now? Are you in the Gulf Coast zone I just described? Drop your city in the comments. I want to know who is already inside this thing today. Tomorrow, Sunday, June 28th, the first expansion of the dome pushes north and east. The GFS and the Euro are in close agreement on this timing. The ridge axis lifts, pulling dangerous heat into northern Louisiana, southern Mississippi, and Arkansas. Memphis, Tennessee is looking at highs near 102 degrees Sunday afternoon. Jackson, Mississippi is likely to push 103. Little Rock, Arkansas falls in the same range. These cities have had a relatively quiet June. This is the first significant heat event targeting this corridor, and it arrives on a weekend when people are outside preparing for the holiday. Monday, June 29th. This is the day I've been circling on every model run I've looked at. The dominant high-pressure center lifts into the Mid-South and the lower Midwest. Nashville enters dangerous territory. St. Louis moves inside the core of the dome. Kansas City sees it too. The NOAA Weather Prediction Center is flagging heat index values approaching 105 to 110 degrees across a wide area from the Central Plains through the Tennessee Valley on Monday afternoon. Heat index of 110 in Memphis, in Nashville. These are not desert cities. These are cities where humidity is already elevated, and where that humidity combines with extreme daytime heating to push apparent temperatures to levels that require active heat, emergency responses from local governments. Updated within the last hour from NOAA, the official discussion now specifically warns that outdoor activities Monday afternoon across the central and southern states are genuinely dangerous and should be avoided unless absolutely necessary. Tuesday, June 30th. The ridge is centered near St. Louis. Forecasters at this point are projecting St. Louis could see up to 8 consecutive days at or above 90 degrees before any meaningful relief arrives. 8 days. For context, the 1995 Chicago event that most meteorologists point to as the benchmark for urban heat disaster lasted about 5 days at its core. 8 days of sustained heat in St. Louis is worth paying attention to. Chicago itself is being flagged for at least 5 consecutive days at or above 90 degrees. 5 days does not sound like much, until you factor in overnight lows that stay in the 70s and the compounding effect on vulnerable populations that do not have access to air conditioning around the clock. ERCOT in Texas has already issued demand alerts. Grid reliability during extended heat events is a real concern, and the longer this dome sits, the more strain accumulates on regional power infrastructure across multiple states simultaneously. Wednesday, July 1st through Saturday, July 4th, the Euro ensemble mean this morning shows no significant disruption to the pattern through at least the holiday weekend. By July 4th, the GFS has the ridge centered approximately over Chicago, with widespread 90s from Wisconsin to the East Coast to the Gulf Coast. That is not one region. That is essentially the eastern half of the country simultaneously inside a heat dome on the most outdoor activity-heavy holiday of the year. The NWS Albany office flagged this specifically in their overnight discussion, that this heat event includes the July 4th holiday period where many outdoor events are scheduled, and that it is important to avoid unnecessary strenuous outdoor activities, drink water even when not thirsty, and have access to cooling. And remember, This is also the day that Utah's governor banned fireworks statewide through July 5th. Not through July 4th, through July 5th. That one extra day in the ban tells you everything about how officials are viewing the fire risk during and immediately after the holiday. Now I want to zoom out. Because the heat dome I just described is not happening in a vacuum, it is the opening chapter of something larger. Right now, the Nino 3.4 index is sitting at approximately positive 0.9 degrees Celsius. That means sea surface temperatures in the central equatorial Pacific are running nearly a full degree above the 1991 through 2020 baseline. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center issued an El Niño advisory earlier this month, and their diagnostic discussion places the probability of El Niño persisting through Northern Hemisphere winter 2026 through 2027 at 96%. That is not a suggestion. That is a near certainty. But there is more. The ECMWF long-range ensemble and the NOAA CFS-V2 model are both now trending toward what climatologists are calling a super El Niño event. Some ECMWF members are projecting Nino 3.4 anomalies exceeding positive 2 degrees Celsius by this fall. That threshold, positive 2 degrees, is where El Niño stops being a moderate climate signal and becomes what researchers describe as a super event. For reference, the two strongest super El Niño events in the modern record were the events of 1997 through 98 and 2015 through 16. Both of those produced dramatic and widespread weather impacts across the globe. The current development is being compared favourably, or perhaps unfavourably, depending on where you live, to those events. What does that mean for right now in late June of 2026? It means the heat dome you're looking at this week is not an isolated event. It is the atmospheric fingerprint of El Niño beginning to assert itself. When El Niño develops during summer, it tends to enhance and extend the subtropical jet stream across the southern United States. That jet acts as a stabilizing force for upper-level ridges. It suppresses the normal disturbances that would otherwise weaken and break down a heat dome. In simple terms, El Niño makes heat domes stickier, harder to dislodge, longer lasting. The omega block pattern that has anchored high pressure over the central United States in recent weeks is a textbook early El Niño summer response. And if the subsurface oceanic data, the Kelvin wave that has been propagating eastward across the equatorial Pacific for the past several months, continues to rise to the surface as projected, this summer may be just the beginning. This is one of the strongest El Niño development signatures I have seen during a June atmospheric pattern in at least a decade. Let me put some numbers behind that claim. The Nino 3.4 sea surface temperature anomaly is currently at approximately positive 0.9 degrees Celsius. That places the event in weak El Niño territory as of today. But the anomaly has been rising. The subsurface oceanic data, which measures the temperature of water at depth across the equatorial Pacific, not just at the surface, shows a massive Kelvin wave of warm water that has been propagating eastward for the past several months. When that subsurface warm water rises to the surface, as it is projected to do through summer and fall, the Nino 3.4 anomaly rises with it. The ECMWF seasonal ensemble, as of this week, has the Nino 3.4 anomaly reaching positive 1.5 to positive 2.0 degrees Celsius by October. The NOAA CFS-V2 model projects a very similar trajectory. At positive 2 degrees, the Climate Prediction Center classifies the event as strong El Niño. Above positive 2 degrees, by convention, it enters super El Niño territory. The IRI at Columbia University, which runs its own independent ENSO forecast, is in agreement with the ECMWF and NOAA trajectory. The probability they assign to a strong or very strong El Niño peaking in the November through January window is currently above 60%. These are not fringe forecasts. These are the three most credible ENSO prediction systems in the world, and they are aligned on a trajectory that, if verified, would represent one of the most significant atmospheric events affecting North American weather in decades. For summer 2026, the immediate implication is the pattern I described: enhanced subtropical jet, persistent ridging, suppressed storm track, more frequent, longer-lasting heat events in the central and eastern United States. But the longer-range implication, looking into fall and winter, is a story we will cover in detail as the season develops. For now, what matters is this: the heat dome arriving this week is not a random weather event. It has a parent. That parent is El Nino, and El Nino is strengthening. The NOAA Climate Prediction Center's seasonal outlook for July through September already shows elevated probability of above normal temperatures from the Central Plains through the Ohio Valley. Above normal precipitation is expected across the southern tier, driven by the enhanced subtropical jet pulling Gulf moisture northward. That moisture-laden air mass does not cool things down. It raises the heat index. It makes the heat more dangerous, not less. What does relief eventually look like? The GFS suggests a trough develops across the Pacific Northwest around July 6th or 7th. That would begin to erode the ridge from the west. But the eastern United States, the Ohio Valley, the Mid-Atlantic, the Southeast, likely does not see meaningful temperature relief until closer to July 8th or 9th. So even after the Independence Day peak, another 4 to 5 days of above normal heat extend across a broad area before we return anywhere near seasonal averages. And I want to be honest with you, even though seasonal averages for early July are not cool, early July averages for Chicago are in the mid-80s, for Atlanta the upper 80s. Coming down from a heat index of 105 to an average of 87 is not relief. It is a reduction in emergency risk. That is a different thing. Have you ever experienced an extended stretch where your overnight temperatures never drop below 75 degrees, where you just cannot cool your house down? Drop that in the comments. I want to know who has been through that and what it felt like, because that is what parts of this country are about to experience for a week or more. What I am confident about regardless of the ridge position uncertainty is this. The geographic footprint of dangerous heat for this event is large enough that the exact center of the dome is almost secondary to the overall impact. Even the parts of the country that end up 5 degrees cooler than the hottest zone are still looking at sustained heat that, combined with elevated overnight lows and high humidity, reaches dangerous threshold levels. The uncertainty is not about whether this heat wave will be significant. The uncertainty is about whether it will be the worst heat wave the Midwest has seen in 15 years, or merely the worst in 5. Either answer is the same from a public safety standpoint, and I want to add one more thing about the model runs that I think is important for anyone tracking this professionally or seriously. The GFS and Euro are in agreement on the overall heat dome event, but they show a slight divergence in the ridge axis position by July 3rd and 4th. The GFS centers the ridge closer to Chicago. The Euro-deterministic run from this morning was slightly further west, closer to St. Louis. That difference of a few hundred miles changes whether Indianapolis and Columbus see the most extreme heat index values, or whether that core falls on Kansas City and Nashville. I will be watching subsequent runs over the next 48 hours very carefully for any convergence or divergence on that positioning. If the ridge shifts in either direction in a meaningful way, I will do an updated video immediately. That is another reason to have notifications turned on for this channel. There is also a wildfire smoke component to the heat that is not getting enough attention in the national coverage. Smoke from the Cottonwood Fire and the Iron Fire is already impacting air quality in Salt Lake City and Moab. The plume is forecast to drift east across the Rockies this weekend, potentially reaching the Front Range and portions of the Central Plains by Sunday. Under a heat dome, smoke behaves differently than it does in a normal weather pattern. High pressure suppresses vertical mixing. That means smoke particles stay concentrated in the lower atmosphere rather than dispersing upward. Cities under a heat dome with smoke advection can see air quality index values spike rapidly in a matter of hours. If you're in Denver, Colorado Springs, Cheyenne, or Rapid City this weekend, I want you to check your local air quality index in the morning before planning outdoor time. Do not rely solely on the sky color. Smoke at the surface level can be nearly invisible until air quality is already in the unhealthy range. One final piece of data that I want to leave you with. The National Interagency Fire Center reports that through June 25, 2026, the number of acres burned nationally has already exceeded the 10-year average for this date. We are not even through the first week of meteorological summer. The peak of wildfire season in the interior west is historically late July through August. The Great Basin is already at emergency response capacity in late June. Under a heat dome that brings extreme temperatures and low humidity to this region, through at least next week, the probability of additional significant fire starts is high. Resources are already committed. Response times to new ignitions will be longer than normal. If you are in the interior west, the risk level for any ignition source, cigarettes, sparks from equipment, campfires, fireworks, is at its most elevated level of the year right now. The governor of Utah did not ban fireworks through July 5th because he wanted to. He did it because the data left no other defensible choice. Let me bring this back to the piece I started with. The Cottonwood Fire, 0% contained, the most destructive fire in Utah state history, still growing this morning. Still with 1/3 of the nation's firefighting resources committed to the Great Basin, and now a heat dome building over the top of it. The connection between these two events, the wildfire crisis in the west and the heat dome moving east, is not coincidental. They share a parent. That parent is the persistent upper-level ridge that has dominated the atmospheric pattern over the western and central United States for weeks. The same high pressure that dried out Utah's fuels and eliminated cloud cover over the Great Basin is the same system now expanding east and preparing to bake Chicago and Nashville and Atlanta in the days ahead. One atmospheric event, two faces, and underneath both of them is the signal from the Pacific, a developing El Nino that ECMWF and NOAA models are trending towards super status, riding on top of a global baseline that is running roughly 1.3 degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial norms. That combination, a warming baseline plus a strengthening El Nino plus a July calendar, is why the NOAA outlook for summer 2026 is tilted the way it is. Not toward cold, not toward average, toward more of what we are seeing right now. Tomorrow I will be watching the morning GFS and Euro runs closely for any shift in the ridge position or any sign of an earlier trough intrusion from the northwest. Either would change the 4th of July timeline. I will have that update ready the moment the data warrants it. If you are not subscribed with notifications on, you will miss it. Hit that button now and share this video with someone planning to be outdoors over the next 10 days. Not because I want you to alarm them, because I want them to have a plan. Drink water before you are thirsty. Identify your nearest cooling center. Check the air quality index in the morning before going out. These are simple things, but during a heat dome that eliminates overnight relief, simple things save lives. Tomorrow I will be watching the morning GFS and Euro runs closely for any shift in the ridge position or any sign of an earlier trough intrusion from the northwest. Either would change the timeline I just laid out. If the ridge is stronger and more persistent than advertised, cities in the northern tier, Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, Cleveland, could see heat index values push even further above what I described. If the trough arrives earlier, the Midwest might get some relief by July 6th or 7th instead of the 8th or 9th. I will have that update ready the moment the data warrants it. One thing I want to make sure you understand about this pattern, even in the scenario where relief comes a day or two earlier than forecast, the Gulf Coast, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama are going to feel this heat regardless. The heat dome will have its longest residence. Time over the southern states. Dallas could be looking at temperatures at or above 100 degrees for 10 or more consecutive days by the time this pattern breaks down. San Antonio is in a similar position. New Orleans, already one of the hottest cities in the nation during heat events due to its combination of high temperatures and extreme humidity, is going to have a dangerous stretch. Every major city from Houston to Atlanta to Nashville to Birmingham should be activating heat emergency response plans this weekend if they have not already. Cooling centers need to be open. Outreach to the elderly and unhoused populations needs to start now before the peak of the dome arrives Monday and Tuesday. Tonight the heat starts on the Gulf Coast. By Monday it reaches the Midwest. By the 4th of July it covers the eastern half of the country. And somewhere in the hills of Beaver County, Utah, the Cottonwood Fire is still burning, 0% contained.